All right, we're ready to start. So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody joining us from different parts of the world. My name is Ambre Tonti-Lamotte, and on behalf of the Charles Darwin Foundation, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the international launch of the second edition of the Galapagos Atlas. Now, before we begin, I'd like to share just a few practical details. This webinar is being recorded. The recording will be shared through our social channels afterwards. For questions, you can use the Q&A function rather than the chat. So please post your question in the Q&A. Make sure to tell us who the question is for, because we've got a great group of panelists. We might group some questions if they touch on similar themes. So now let me briefly introduce today's program and speakers. First, we have our Executive Director, Rakan Zahawi, who will give us an overview of the new Atlas, what it offers for research, education, and conservation. He'll be joined also by Gustavo Jimenez, who is going to take us a little bit deeper into the publication structure and scientific methodology. He was the Atlas's editor-in-chief. Then we'll open up to a panel moderated by Rakan that will bring together several of the Atlas's co-authors. So in no particular order, these include Robert Bensted-Smith, who's worked on Galapagos conservation strategy and governance for several decades. He was also director of the Charles Darwin Research Station. We've got Bill Durham, being professor in human biology at Stanford University, who's working at the intersection of evolution, tourism, and sustainability. We've got Karen Harpp, who's a volcanologist at Colgate University. She studies geological origins and ongoing evolution of the archipelago. Then we have also from the CDF, Birgit Fessl, who leads our land bird conservation program, has worked in Galapagos for the better part of 25 years. And like I said earlier, we've got also Gustavo Jimenez, who's joining our panel. And besides obviously editing the Atlas, which was a huge piece of work, he is also a wildlife veterinarian and leads our marine bird conservation program. So at the very end, we'll also open up the floor to the questions. So do start sending them in through the Q&A as we go. And I want to thank you on behalf of everybody for joining us for this occasion. We're super excited. So Rakan, now over to you.
Thanks, Amber. And welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Rakan Zahawi. I'm the executive director of the Charles Darwin Foundation. It's really fantastic to see over 100 participants already and still increasing. So the Atlas is a scientific resource. It's built based on decades of research here in Galapagos, on fieldwork, on collections, mapping, photography, and then it represents collaboration. It began just over 10 years ago over a very specific but simple request by a partner who asked for a list of Galapagos's most important species. That's really kind of a simple question, but it was an interesting one. I mean, I wasn't here at the time, but it basically showcased a gap. What makes one species more important than another? Do we have such a curated list? Tons of literature on different species of Galapagos, but nothing that really provided an overview of Galapagos through a scientific lens, a compendium, if you will. So we set out with a lot of different experts to produce this publication, which the first edition was in Spanish, came out in 2018. And that was a collaboration with WWF and many authors. Likewise, today's second edition is now an update of much of that information. And in this case, it's in English. Initially, we had talked about basically just doing a translation, but that over time morphed into a second edition. So it has a lot more information, including in this edition invasive species as well, because they're part of the reality of Galapagos. So extremely proud to have managed to get this over the finish line and published, and that's what we are launching today. So with Gustavo's help, as the Atlas editor-in-chief, we'll take you through some of the Atlas's key highlights, the structure, the evidence behind it, and contribution to science, as well as education and conservation. And as we go through this, one key question that I'll also be asking of our panel later today is to keep in mind, how can we take such a publication and make it an active instrument for better decision making? So if we could have the slides, please. Super. Hopefully everybody can see that. So the Atlas was put together by an editorial committee led by Gustavo Jimenez and Nicolas Moiti. Byron Delgado did a lot of the editorial work, well, almost all the editorial work and the publishing, and Mario Jose Barragan and an extended committee helped with all the editing and proofing. Next slide, please. Few highlights here. 60 plus species listed, 20 that are new in this edition, including 15 species, as I mentioned earlier, that are introduced or invasive. This is the contribution of more than 80 experts and scientists, specialists in their field. And as I mentioned, this edition is in English. We already had a couple of questions as to whether we can move this into Spanish, and that's certainly under consideration. But for now, we have this English version. Next slide, please. And a key aspect of this, to just show you the volume of work that has gone into producing this, there are 56 pages of references, 300 pages in all of the atlas itself. So a fifth of the atlas is a list of all the articles, technical reports, databases, so on, that have been cited in the atlas that support the information that's present there. So that's not only backs it up through scientific evidence, but it also acts as a fantastic reference, right? So anybody who wants to look something up on Galapagos can open this atlas, go to the species that they're interested in, and then look at that associated set of references. Next slide, please. So the atlas is a compendium of information. It acts as a bridge between the science that CDF and others produce and the public. As such, it's set up so that anybody can use it. As I mentioned just now, you've got that fantastic list of references, but also provides really important information and that's tangible and digestible by the broader public, and we hope that then translate to support management decisions. Next slide, and I believe I hand it over to Gustavo.
Hey everyone, thank you to enjoy this presentation about the Atlas. Well, the Atlas has different chapters. In this case, we have an introduction. Next, please. And then we travel practically for different chapters. For example, we have some information about the geology, so we know what happened thousands and thousands of years in Galapagos. And these islands are affecting for different currents, even atmospheric or marine currents affecting the Galapagos Islands, and also has two kinds of seasons, hot and cold seasons. And these currents and climate affect the habitats of the species, giving the Galapagos the different ecosystems and bioregions. In the case of the bioregions, there are 5, meanwhile the ecosystem, there are many, and different species adapted in these areas. Next, please. And also it's important to travel practically in this book when you are reading the human presence in Galapagos, because the human has different impact on the Galapagos, on the islands, positive and negative, the scientists, the fisheries, the tourism, etc. And also we have some information about Charles Darwin observation. When he came to Galapagos, he was younger, and also when he was elder practically, he did the evolution theory, and then we can see one introduction about this issue in the Atlas, and also the origins of the conservation science in Galapagos, talking about the different steps the station or the Galapagos research stations did on Galapagos to conserve and protect the species and the habitats. Practically because this is the first and the oldest scientist institution on the islands. Next, please. Well, after that, we have the methodology, or what's the methodology we use it. We work together with different scientists, people doing the different research, and we present different part of the sheets. In the case of the individual sheets, we have, for example, common and scientist name, taxonomy, the current status, what's happening with this species. The ecological importance is, for example, why we define the species, for example, and key species, sentinel species. Also the distribution also in the maps and the text. But one point important in these fact sheets is the information needs. Does it mean the gaps the species or the habitat has? So it practically is the first step for the scientists to do the next studies in the future. And also we have a small area for my notes. For example, you have new information, you have new data, you can add that information in the book. And what the authors of the different parts of the atlas, the text or practically and the map. But one important point is the definition of ecological roles. So we divided, for example, in keystone. These species that play important role principally in the ecosystem on the habitats. And practically these characteristics of these keystone species is the addition of the sentinel and bioindicator species. In the case of sentinel species, practically is this species show or practically is the response of the environmental impacts, positive and negative, And bioindicators species, in the case is, for example, is something is affecting the species. For example, toxins or these species in reproduction time, mortality, some level is affecting the population. The other is bioengineered species. For example, these species change practically the habitat. In the case could be an example, good example, the tortoise. And well, the last ecological definition is the single island species. So it's the unique species in that habitat and that species. Next, please. Next. Oh, thanks. And the methodological data or methodological development of the Atlas maps, we work together with Nicolás Moiti, and Byron Delgado. So we defined which could be the best issue or the best methodology to use your data, to put your data in the map. So we have different kinds of map, for the maps, sorry. For example, we have points when the scientist just has point of that species, the GPS aligns, so it's continuous data. For example, could be around the coast or in the trail, on the road, or following one trail. The other is polygon areas, is for example, the area specific of the species. Next one is raster model. So the idea, well, actually is to model and to know where could be the species in different habitats according the characteristic of those habitats. And digitalization is practically with engineering species. We were in that in the last kind of map. Please, next. In the center of the Atlas, the Galapagos Atlas, we have two groups. The single or the individual species and the group species. But all of them, they are divided in two groups, endemic and native species, and introduced or invasive species. And then I'm going to give you some examples. In this case of corals, for example, the authors, they show us the number of the species they are here and how they are affecting, for example, with the climate change and the ENSO, how it's affecting the species. And also, they are doing or they are writing the new species they discover in this time. Next. In the case of the individual fact sheet, tenemos in this case example of Galapagos Bluefoot booby. In this case, for example, in the map, you can see the different kind of maps. We have, for example, point, we have a raster, and then you can see the distribution of these species on Galapagos. And also we can see the status of the species. For example, in the 70s, these species, they were more than 20,000. Meanwhile, in the 2000s, there are less 7,000. So we can see what happened with these species in the time with the ecological importance, because we're seeing how the ENSO is affecting the species in the time. But information needs, also we need to know exactly what they are eating, what happened with the species in the future, what happened, for example, if the El Nino is the strongest or frequently, and well, the distribution and my notes. Next, please. Meanwhile, in the group of the introduced species or invasive species, we have a long list, more than 15 species, between plants, invertebrates, and vertebrates. Next. And I'm going to give you a couple examples. In this case, the invasive ants, the four introduced species, one of them introduced in Galapagos more than 100 years. And these groups are affecting other endemic species, other native species, but also is affecting agricultural groups, the people. So it's important to know what happened with the species and how we can control these species working together with the national park. Next. And the feral cat, the picture is a little cute, but actually no, it's a cute species. Actually, it's an invasive species, affect a lot of species, actually uh, extinct many species around the world. These species actually arrived to Galapagos 2 centuries ago, and working together with the national park, we are the Charles Darwin Station eradicated this species on Baltra, and also is working with other ONGs in Floriana and other islands. But also we need information, the gaps of these species. For example, how or why they adapted in different areas. For example, the color of the skin of this species. For example, in the highlands, the color is cream, and while in the coast are black or dark colors. And also we need to know how they can survive without water in the coast and other things. So we work this fact sheet with other collaborators from other ONGs. Next. Rakan, thank you.
Super, Gustavo. Thank you very much for that quick deep dive. So what does the Atlas make possible? As I mentioned earlier, the idea here is for this new edition, even the original edition, certainly idea came out from a fairly simple question. But when you break it down and start thinking about it, you can look at the different audiences we're hoping to reach with this atlas. The first, the scientists. This is a compendium of information, but hopefully, based on the information provided, it raises new questions for scientists and points to gaps in our information. As far as managers go, it hopefully informs managers and and positions them to make better management decisions. It's a key tool for educators to teach about biodiversity and the unique aspect of Galapagos, as well as the threats that are faced here. It can serve as a really important tool for naturalist guides who are always looking for additional information and new information and the latest information. And this provides that information in one accessible place. And then last but certainly not least, the broader public as a way to better understand the uniqueness and the importance of conserving this special archipelago. Next slide. So again, just to emphasize this point, the atlas is the result or the product, the output of decades of research in Galapagos and helps us better understand, value, and conserve the archipelago. Next slide. Super important that this publication, so we have the digital version that'll be available online for download, but we have it in print form as well. It's available in our donation point. This is thanks to CKW Publishing. This is actually a connection we made during our 65 house parties in Houston. So just one example of our many, the depth of some of these important events that we do abroad. This publisher came to us and expressed an interest in supporting us in an important publication. We'd been working on the Atlas for a number of years, and this was a great opportunity to actually get it into print. So big thanks to CKW Lux for supporting the publication of the Atlas. Next slide. As I mentioned, the Atlas is obviously a product of the effort of more than 80 scientists who contributed to the different sections here. But internally at CDF, a lot of people were involved in this process, some more than others, but an important, big collaborative effort to get this over the finish line. Next slide, please. Important to thank all our major donors at CDF. And with that, I believe we move over to our panel. Thank you. So to just go into a little bit more detail about what's inside the Atlas, as Amber mentioned at the beginning, we have 5 invited panelists. All of them are co-authors to the publication and come at this from very different vantage points. I'm going to go through and ask each of our panelists a question, and then we'll have a collective question at the end that maybe all or some of the panelists would like to answer. So I'll start with how the Atlas was built and the choices that were made behind it, because it has a number of key species, but obviously it's not comprehensive. That question will go to Gustavo. Then to the geologic origins of the archipelago with Karen Harpp, which is one of the key themes at the start of the publication. From there to what decades of monitoring, long-term monitoring, tell us about species and their recovery with land bird conservation with principal investigator Birgit Fessl. Onto human dimensions of conservation with Bill Durham. And finally, to that broader question I opened up with, how knowledge can be turned into action, which I'll ask after these individual questions. So, Gustavo, as editor, how did the team balance scientific precision, accessibility, and very different levels of evidence across species and disciplines?
Thank you, Rakan. Well, actually, it's a long answer, but we can start. Practically, this is the second edition in English. Has more than 80 scientists working together. That's very interesting because the list of the original data was in 2015, and when in that time we did the first atlas in 2018. But the idea was this atlas need to be going up, and we need to add more information because the information the scientists do always is growing up. So we decided to do the second edition. We add many species, and it's interesting to work together with different scientists, you know. Uh, all scientists I add in that list, we are practically very detailed to do the studies, collect the data, to do the model, to try to analyze the data. So actually it was interesting work with all of them in different issues with invertebrates, plants, and vertebrates was very interesting. But also was interesting work with other groups, not in the science groups, with the communication groups. For example, the people doing the design, for example, in this case, Boris Herrera, the whole team of the communication, how they developed the atlas, but also to work together with the people do make or did the maps. In this case was Nico and Byron, because with we have a big discussion about the models, and they apply the information they have on the maps, just the text, the simple text to put in the maps. So that's interesting of the atlas, you know. So practically is if you are going to take this book, you are going to have a long history of the scientists' publications, reports, technical reports from the ranger scientists, guides, and on the community people. So you are going to travel about what happened in Galapagos and different issues, and I hope you can enjoy this book. And practically, I want to say thank you to all scientists because I bother, please, I need to the information, please send me because we have a deadline to do the different things. So yeah, that's Rakan. Thank you.
Super, Gustavo. Thanks for that. It must have, well, I lived it from afar, but I know that was quite a juggling act. Okay, Karen, good question for you. Why does understanding the geological origin and ongoing evolution of the islands matter for interpreting the biodiversity and conservation challenges presented in the Atlas?
Thanks for inviting me to do this first. And I'm just going to do a little bit of geologic background to set the stage because fewer people know about that aspect of the islands. The Galapagos Islands are volcanic, and they're formed by a mantle plume, which is a column of hot rock that rises from deep in the earth to the surface. And as the Nazca Plate that the Galapagos Islands are located on moves over the plume, young islands emerge as active volcanoes, and they grow as they erupt to form islands like Fernandina. Then, as they're carried away from the plume by the plate, they become less and less volcanically active. They become extinct eventually. They become vegetated and end up looking more like Española, the oldest island in the Galapagos today. This process means the islands follow a very distinct life cycle, providing dry land for about 3 million years or less. But their life cycle continues from there, which is cool. Gradually, the islands contract, they erode, and they end up sinking below sea level and become drowned islands or seamounts. At every stage of their life, these volcanic islands provide unique habitats that support different types of flora and fauna, from lava cactuses on young Fernandina lava flows to scalesia forests on middle-aged volcanoes like Santa Cruz to submarine feeding stations for sharks once they become seamounts. It turns out that the life cycle of an island between 1 and 3 million years is about the same amount of time it takes for many species to become isolated and evolve, which is one of the reasons the Galapagos is such an important place for understanding biological evolution and biodiversity in the context of this geologic setting. We've learned over the last 20 years or so more about the life cycles of these islands. For instance, some have grown really quickly, like Fernandina. It's been built in the last 50,000 years, actually. And the last seamount there's a large seamount south of Marchena as well, which emerged and then sank below the sea in just 2 million years, younger than some of the oldest islands. So I'm also currently trying to constrain the life cycles of the oldest islands, San Cristobal and Hispaniola. San Cristobal's been active almost its entire life, erupting as recently as only 5,000 years ago, which is like yesterday for a geologist. And it emerged just over 2 million years ago. By contrast, we haven't found any lavas on Hispaniola younger than 3 million years, so it's been extinct much longer than San Cristobal, and that surely has impacted colonization and evolution on both of these islands. So the Galapagos provides basically a natural space to understand the link and the connection between geology and biology. Fernandina is young, it's still being colonized. Santa Cruz is mature. Hispaniola will sink beneath the ocean in a few 100,000 years. How these processes influence organismal evolution and the connection to conservation, something we are all still trying to understand. The atlas, with its clear scientific and spatial information, the beautiful imagery as well, provides a comprehensive, it's really an accessible and engaging mechanism for scientists, managers, students, residents, visitors to the Galapagos to understand the links between biology and geology, and how they relate to the biodiversity and conservation challenges facing the Galapagos today.
That's a super answer. Thank you, Karen. I love the term submarine feeding stations. Birgit, on to you. What can long-term land bird monitoring reveal that a single assessment or short-term project cannot?
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity as well to be part of this great event. So long-term monitoring allows us to see changes that we simply cannot detect from a single survey, right? So a single assessment tells us what is happening at a particular moment. But when we return to the same place or to the same species, right, then we can distinguish between normal fluctuations and long-term trends. So we can see whether population is gradually declining, whether environmental changes are beginning to act on their distribution or their breeding success. Maybe also importantly, we can see whether conservation action that we have developed and we started to implement actually is working. So this is particularly important in Galapagos because for all these reasons Karen told us, it's a place where population naturally fluctuate quite a bit, right? And there are environmental conditions like each year is a little bit different, more hotter, wetter, whatever, not given El Niño and Niña. So it's really, there is a lot of natural fluctuations. And if you have just a short term or 1 or 2 years of monitoring, it's very difficult to know whether a change you have observed is because it's a natural variable, a natural response to natural variability, or if it's a real shift in the population. And with long-term monitoring, we can also understand the biology behind those things. Those changes, we can follow things like the breeding success, the survival, and see how species interact with the environment and also with other species. So sometimes warning signs of emerging problems are just getting obvious a couple of years down the road, right? It's not instantly. A very good example for me is the avian vampire fly. So with long-term monitoring, we have been able to understand much better the relationship between this fly and its bird hosts. So we know better when birds are vulnerable, how infestation affects the reproduction and the survival, and which species are more affected, or at which locations we have to, the response is more stronger than on others. And all that knowledge has been essential for the development of management tools and management strategies. But the monitoring doesn't stop there, right? So we have developed some solutions and we need to continue on monitoring. We need the long-term data to tell whether any intervention is actually working and how we can adapt it and how we can improve it. So maybe that's one of the really most important things for long-term monitoring. It creates an evidence base for adaptive conservation, and we can better identify which species or which places need more attention. and then do our management and then come back year after year and to see how that really affects actually, if that makes a difference for this population or this species. So in a simple terms, you can say the short-term projects, they're great and they give us a snapshot, and long-term monitoring gives us the story. And for conservation, we need the story.
That's super. Thank you, Birgit. And I'm sure in the context of this incoming potential super El Nino event, that's critically important. And maybe we can get to a question about that if we have time later on in the session. Bill, over to you. The Atlas brings human presence into the same frame as geology, biodiversity, and conservation. Why is that integration essential for the future of Galapagos?
Thank you, Rakan, and hearty thanks to Gustavo and the editorial committee for the wonderful content and layout of the Atlas, with a shout out to the map makers, and Nico and Byron and all the photographers. What a beautiful book this is. So happy to be part of its launch. So we Homo sapiens have had tangible and increasing impact in the Galapagos Islands, you could say since 1535 when they were, quote, discovered, but certainly since the 1600s. It's no longer an isolated place. It's no longer an isolated set of ecological systems. We think of it now as a set of social ecological systems. There's society and there's the ecology, and they're now integrated in a daily, constant fashion. In short, we're part of it all. We've always been part of it all, but in Galapagos, it's freshly imprinted on you what an important part of it all we are. A good example of that is that human activity has tangible impact on the ability of living species to survive and reproduce in Galapagos. We can see it today in El Nino events. We can see it in climate change. We can see it in pollution. We can see it in habitat change. Human activity has tangible impact on the ability of the organisms there to survive and reproduce, which is what has made them part of the situation. So the challenge, the question we must ask going forward is, how can we think about this social ecological system? How can we keep thinking and modeling the interactions in a way that's meaningful, that helps us learn to coexist with these very small populations of fragile, specialized species? How can we learn to coexist with these small populations of fragile, specialized species? Friends, isn't that the question facing all of us on Earth? Yes, the species may be different and they may not be so fragile. Yes, the populations may not be so small, but this question of coexistence is such a fundamental question. And so I think that's why in Galapagos we have not a model system, we have a really wonderful global example for thinking about the social ecological interactions of this new system that we're part of and that we need to understand and work with to model and predict a better future for all of us on Earth. Thank you.
Bill, that's super, and a great way of framing how Galapagos is a microcosm and such an example for the rest of the world. If we can get it right here, then hopefully, presumably, we can do that and apply it elsewhere. Rob, our last panelist, for your specific question, where, in your opinion, does the largest gap still remain between producing strong evidence and translating it into timely public decisions?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to participate. And this atlas is absolutely great. It's a real eye-opener, and I love the fact that it dives straight in with deep-sea kelp and lichens and snails, these important parts of the ecosystem which rarely get mentioned in plans and publications. So I think the application of scientific evidence to decision-making has been most effective on issues which are technically complex but have few trade-offs or conflicts between stakeholders. For example, there have been some brilliant programs to control invasive species. By contrast, there can be big gaps between evidence and decisions in situations where the evidence is feeding into a poor governance system, even if the communication of the science is good, which isn't always the case. For example, if the governance structure sidelines key stakeholders, whether from the mainland or the islands, or if the decision-making process meanders along with no clear endpoint, or if decisions are undermined by behind-the-scenes lobbying, perhaps by groups with commercial interests, or for that matter, if the institutions then fail to implement the decisions once they've been made, which causes a loss of confidence in the whole process. So we have seen these kinds of issues arise in relation to hot topics like tourism growth and also in the marine realm, for example, in relation to zoning and longlining. So in such situations, the technical evidence tends to get distorted or just drowned out by the loud competing opinions. So I'll just mention a couple of changes that could make these sorts of situations less frequent and less conflictive and help to bridge that gap between evidence and decisions. One would be to change the framework for development decision making, just a small ask. So can we agree and apply in practice a holistic framework for well-being of people and wildlife in the islands that recognizes the complexity of the social and ecological interactions and the limits on growth? That would certainly encourage the use of evidence, especially multidisciplinary evidence, for decision making. And the other change would be to ensure that whatever the specific issues, all the actors involved, be they local, national, international, whatever, they share the same core general knowledge about Galapagos biodiversity and the social ecosystem. It's difficult to use evidence on a specific issue effectively if the institutions and stakeholders hearing that evidence all have different assumptions about the ecosystem in which they're operating. So I think the Atlas can make a real contribution there. Anyone reading it soon realizes there is much more to Galapagos than meets the eye, and that there is a remarkable depth of scientific information. You get a real sense not only of the stars of the show, but also the less known components of the flora and fauna. And you appreciate how the native biodiversity has changed and is changing as invasive species spread, as resources are exploited, and as climate breakdown disrupts ocean life. And on the positive side, of course, as conservation efforts push back against these trends. And it's all supported by maps and facts and figures and the amazing bibliography. It's just a terrific tool. So I think the Atlas can really facilitate the uptake and use of scientific evidence in decision-making processes, but that needs to be complemented by other actions to strengthen the governance system.
That's super, Rob. Thank you for that answer, and that really sort of positions us well for this common question, which each of you are welcome to chime in on. But in case we run out of thoughts about this, you don't all have to answer it. But sort of building on what Rob is saying here, what would make the Atlas a living resource rather than a publication that's consulted occasionally? Obviously, you have a publication date, it goes online, and it has a half-life just like anything else out there. But what would make that shift and make it more of a living resource in your opinion? And whoever on the panel would like to, Karen, go ahead.
Sure.
And then Bill.
I think, perfect. The first idea is one that someone already suggested in the Q&A section, which is to make it available both digitally through tour operators and naturalist guides, because that's going to, and in person, so they can purchase it in different places. Of course, that's already the case. That's an enormous potential audience, guaranteed, motivated, and interested. So that's an obvious one. The other one is to leverage the educational power and potential of this great atlas. That would be, I was just in the Galapagos recently working with some students who are future science teachers and working at a school there with current teachers, and everyone was really excited about using the atlas and that this exists now. So it also helps that it perfectly aligns with the Galapagos contextualized curriculum's emphasis on conservation. So getting it out into the Galapagos and Ecuadorian schools, of course, will be super helpful. This can go internationally too. There's a lot of us working with teachers, science teachers, educational systems that we could distribute this through. For instance, a colleague of mine, Meg Gardner, and I, who were just in Galapagos, are working on getting curriculum designed by undergrads out about the Galapagos, and we're going to integrate the Atlas into that to give examples of how to use it in schools for teachers and leveraging both the K-12, the elementary and secondary schools networks internationally and university networks internationally, because there's so much emphasis on education focused on the Galapagos because it's so interesting and such a great interdisciplinary space. I think that could really distribute it as a very useful tool.
That's super. So digitally, that's available or will be available after this launch, and it's free. So we can check that box. And then you have the educational power and getting it into schools, and that can be both a local and an international component. I think those are all great examples. Bill, any additional ideas?
I appreciate what Karen has suggested, and I have one easy suggestion that would fit in nicely with hers, and that is to post an online version with hot links. That is to say, from the index or table of contents at the beginning to the fact sheets, so that you can quickly move between the fact sheets and so on. But more importantly, from the superscript notes to the references at the back. It's really convenient. You could even have a scroll over feature where it shows the reference in a little bubble, a pop-up. That would be really handy both for educators, for guides, for people. I can imagine managers, all kinds of people wanting a hotline version that had hot links so that you didn't have to flip back and forth and back and forth. It makes it easier to read. A more important suggestion, I would think, to help make it a living resource is to begin a series of online podcasts. I would start with the authors. I would start with the authors of the fact sheets and the introductory sections, and I would have them expand on the themes and on the examples, especially the authors of the fact sheets. There's so much about each of these organisms, it's impossible to condense it into the framework of the printed page, although they've done a magnificent job, and the references and the hot links would certainly help. But it'd be so wonderful to hear them expand on what they think is really important about that organism, its key ecological role, how it's changing, its conservation issues. And there you would have a wonderful series of, 60-some podcasts featuring the authors and allowing them to bring it up to date. So it seems to me that that could be something that could actually, if you go through it in 3 years, all those chapters, you could start over again, like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. You'd start all over and have the same people come back and update again. That would help make it a living resource, I believe. And you would hear directly from the people who've done so much of the work. I think it's just a wonderful way to make it a living resource.
Another set of fantastic ideas, and I saw Amber smiling there, so I think she's taking notes here. Great idea on building out a series of podcasts, and we can certainly look at how to make that online version more user friendly. So thank you for those suggestions and contributions. Rob.
Yeah, so I think the motivation to keep using and maintaining the Atlas will be generated by its impact on attitudes and on actions. So a couple of ideas in that direction. One is, I think it can fill what seems to be a gap in public outreach, especially by authorities, which is providing systematic updates on the status and trends of the archipelago's biodiversity. Most communication programs talk about the institution's activities, its projects, and so on, but there isn't that always available information about what's happening to biodiversity across the board. It goes back to Birgit's comments about monitoring. But transparent communication about the scale of the task is a prerequisite for making biodiversity conservation a shared challenge across society and not just the job of the authorities. with some rather vaguely defined local support. So I think if the park and CDF were to use the Atlas in their outreach programs, then it could be a great tool for that and would motivate the maintenance and updating. And it does also then if you use it in that way, it gives a bit of a challenge to CDF and the park and other authorities, which is, so what will your response be to those who say, okay, we've read in the Atlas about the biodiversity, we've followed up the references, we're up for this. So what concrete action can we take? What's our role? How do we get involved? If there's a good answer there, then I think the Atlas will be a very, very much a living resource.
That's fantastic. Maybe one more, Birgit, quickly, because we want to get a few questions in as well from the audience. So yeah.
Very quickly, maybe a little bit like linked with what Rob was saying. I think what's super important is trying to give also people the tools that they can contribute to the next version of the Atlas. And I think there are so good tools like iNaturalist or eBird out there. And I think if we can get more laymen on board and really interested in the importance of conservation and use the Atlas like a starting point, right? To learn about species, but get interested in, get curious about, and then maybe get on and contribute with their their contribution and their observations. I think that would be really, really cool. So maybe together with any other storytelling, trying to link that in so that people know what tools they can use and what power they can have with their own observations.
That's great. But between you and Rob, I think we have the outlines of edition number 3. So super. Thank you all for that feedback and those suggestions. I think those are really good. We have a lot of questions here and not much time, but let's see how quickly we can get through these. Amber and I will be sort of distilling this and passing them on to you. So anybody from the panel, feel free to jump in. The first question is from Edison Chavez, who asks, what is the current status of invasive species control in the highlands of Santa Cruz and other islands, especially Blackberry? Is that information covered in the Atlas? That could be either maybe Birgit or Gustavo.
Gustavo, I don't know. Do you know how much the Moro is covered? So the invasive species, yes, we have like an oldest inhabited islands with highland zone. We have our top 3, 4, 5, I don't know. So the mammals, which are the rodents and the cats, and then in some places also pigs and goats eventually still. And then we have the plants, which is a huge one, like the blackberry, but we also have citrulla and we have guayaba. And I do think that the Atlas does cover and does point on the importance of or the problematic of invasive species also on these areas. So I don't know if that's enough of an answer.
Yeah, I think, and that certainly provides the framework. I think I can add that, our work is moving to scale up the mitigation that we're doing in Scalesia systems. So adding more and more hectares and bringing them under management control. There's also a concerted effort to look at Floriana as a holistic restoration initiative and focus on habitat restoration island-wide there, which is a huge undertaking. But you have to start somewhere and sort of set an example, if you will, at the island level. And we just recently brought in a lead senior scientist to help sort of move that initiative forward. So certainly scaling up the effort in habitat. Next question actually goes back to a comment I made earlier today, so I'm glad it's been put forward. This is from Greg Estes. Is there a section in the Atlas on El Nino and ENSO? Are there any indicator species that are being focused on this year by scientists that could help us study the progression and magnitude of the super El Nino we are experiencing? And do we have enough baseline data to compare this year with past El Ninos? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Gustavo, don't
Think
you
it,
have an answer on that?
Don't be shy.
I think it needs
Don't
to
be
be
shy.
somebody from the Galapagos end of this conversation, the station side. Yeah.
Robert, maybe.
No, I was saying I think it needs to be somebody who's
Yeah.
in the front line of
Well,
the work
So
rather than.
so I
well,
do think we do have very good monitoring and long-term monitoring data. So the comparison, yes, and the park, and I think that was started from from the government. They ask for a list of species and both on endemic and invasive that needs a special attention. So it is well in the intention of all kind of fields, scientific fields, from marine to over to land and from animals to plants. And a lot of specific monitoring that will be done to see if there is what the effects are, right? So I think yes, the big answer is yes, there is. The details I don't have.
well, oh, sorry, Bill.
I was just going to suggest that El Nino is something that deserves a section in the Atlas, and maybe it could be added through the podcast system, and maybe there could be every few years there could be an appendium, something added to that would be circulated and freely available on the website. But I think El Nino is so deserving of special attention that it ought to be highlighted more in the Atlas.
Yeah, adding this information, for example, like the chapter El Niño per se in the Atlas is not over there. However, if you are reading each fact sheet, you can see how the threats affecting different habitats and the threats of the different species there are on the Atlas. So that's interesting. However, for more information about this, we're working together with the National Park, doing the next step to the monitoring for the species in Galapagos and the terrestrial and marine species. So we're working together with the National Park, also with other ONGs to know what happened, how we are going to affect this this El Nino in this year. We're doing the different plans to protect the species to the future for this ENSO in the future.
That's
Yeah, I'd
super.
just
Thank
add,
you all. Oh, go ahead,
I
Rob.
do know that the Galapagos Invasive Species Fund recently approved a sort of urgent project for CDF and the park to work on monitoring and adaptation to this current El Nino.
Absolutely. And to the degree possible, our different programs, especially those involved in long-term monitoring, are trying to sort of collect data at different times over the course of this Nino in order to see how its progressive impact over time. Next question is from Joana Maribel Soria Aguirre. How was the participation of general public, tourists, or public in general from Galapagos or Ecuador in the development of the Atlas? Did you use some kind of citizen science for the data collection? That might be a question for Gustavo.
Well, actually, when we did the list of the species, we tried to look the scientists working more with those species. However, the information we put on the atlas was from scientists, rangers, technician, community, according the scientists. Because if you have contact with them, you could add that information in your chapter, you know. So the per se, like the community directly, we can say we indirectly they are working in the atlas. But the idea of this information is to give that information. The target is the community, the scientists, the management people, all of them. Yeah.
Great. And I love Birgit's idea of linking iNaturalist back into the atlas in some form. Was in the mapping, was any of that kind of information included, or was that just based on natural history collections? Gustavo?
For the maps?
Yeah.
Well, the discussion of the maps was, well, actually was a discussion with the author and the people doing the maps, with Byron and Nico. So according you have the information, you do the maps. So because the maps, they have different model, remember, they have points, lines, raster, and other kind of models. So they have a big discussion with them according according the information they have it, and to put on the map. Because of that, the maps, they are not the same each fact sheet. They're different. So that's very important because you can have more information and robust information with the data they collected and put on the map.
I just
Super.
think for
Yeah.
for all this general or for the species that have been selected, I think there was enough information, right, from most of them CDF and other scientists, but especially for the bird side, for example, there's a huge, all the guides and the information about these rare migrants. And now in El Nino, we have every week a new sighting from a new species. So this information is crucial, and that comes through eNaturalist or eBird or WhatsApp groups. So I do think it's much more, it's really a very great system for new arrivals that could be migrants to invasive species. So maybe not the very not the finches per se, for example.
Great. Thank you, Birgit. Well, we've been talking a little bit about the concerns and the worries. So this is a twist and looking at the question here from Luis Unda. Does the Atlas report on the flourishing or well-being of individual animals? Do you think there would be value in reporting more explicitly on individual species flourishing alongside the current population and ecosystem level reporting? Who would like to
Makes that
take
point
this?
on tortoises. The tortoises come through loud and clear that they're rebounding, that the breeding efforts have been very successful, and that everything's looking much, much better than even 20 years ago as far as the tortoises are concerned. So that's one good example, I think, of the flourishing of a species of a set of species.
Yeah, if I could add something as well, I think for me the key thing is to have to be comprehensive or to be balanced in the atlas. I think, as I mentioned earlier, there can be a tendency for institutions to want to promote the good news and not the bad news. And I think that the idea of an atlas should be to not, we're not trying to promote a particular institutional achievement or failure or whatever. It's about saying this is what's happening. This is the status of things. These things are flourishing. These things are declining. But this is the information base. This is the knowledge we need to use. And I think that should be the philosophy behind the Atlas, and to be really transparent about it in both directions.
That's an extremely important point. Thank you for bringing that up, Rob. A very punctual question from Fernanda Basulto. Does the atlas include fungi? I'm seeing nods. I didn't see it in the atlas in my perusal, so I take that as a yes. It does include fungi. Amber, any other questions that are coming through?
I do have one here from Chris Blair. Is there content in the book that highlights the historical and modern impact of humans on Galapagos beyond the introduction of species? Maybe Gustavo, you can take that one. You're on mute.
You're on mute, Gus.
There's echo from your background. Could you repeat? Sorry.
I said, does the book does it include any highlights of the historical and modern impact of humans on Galapagos beyond the introduction of invasive species?
Per se, that chapter, not like that. But in each fact sheet, you can see the different threats the humans affected, positive and negative, to the different species and the habitats. Also, we have one chapter about the humans, how's the impact, for example, the fisheries, the scientists, the tourism, etc. But also, like Robert said, in the equilibrium, in the middle, to be transparency, see, to show the information we have.
Yeah, and I do think there was a section about tourism, and when it started really to go out of the sustainable range. I think that was I like this section very well. I think that was quite good.
There's good material on fishing, on tourism, and also on just the human population generally, and a good graphic analysis of population growth and rates of population increase. So what I liked was that it begins with that. Sometimes the human impact and the human presence is stuck away in the back of a book. And what I like about it is the atlas opens with that. It doesn't overemphasize it. It doesn't give it great numbers of pages. It gives it the same treatment as you might expect, but I like the fact that it's right there at the beginning.
Super.
I have one
Yeah.
last question. That one's for you,
One last
Rakan.
question. Oh,
It's from Sylvia Harcourt. Will the atlas reach decision makers? The usual dilemma assigns to get to management decisions.
well, that's the hope. And I think that was a question that was asked here in general, in terms of how do we keep this and make this you know, a living resource. But certainly the more people that are that have access to this information, the more people that see it, the more that generates in conversation, and hopefully the more that winds up influencing decision makers. But a huge part of what we do at CDF is not just producing scientific information, but also trying to push that to those who make decisions that help to better conserve Galapagos. So this is one tool of many in my mind.
All right.
I think we're running out of time here, so I'll hand it over to Amber. And thank you,
Yes.
panelists, for all your contributions. That was fantastic.
Yes, I echo Rakan's thanks. No, really, thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to everybody who dialed in, who was part of the launch today. I hope you you enjoy looking at the atlas, discovering how it's structured. The atlas is now part of the scientific and educational infrastructure of Galapagos, so please read it, cite it, share it, use it in classrooms, in research, when you guide, decision making, and in conversations just about the future of the islands. The resource is available for free online. It's actually available right now, but given you all participating in this webinar, you will have a follow-up email that will include the link directly. I have not posted it in the general chat yet, but some of you have already asked and I sent you the link, but it is available for free online. We do have this concept of open science, so we want to make it available for free. We also have beautiful hard copies available in our shop of the atlas in our donation point in the Galapagos Islands. We can arrange to send some. Obviously, it's a bit difficult if it's very far away, but we have had already some requests, and I think there's somebody already on the call here who has received their copy of the atlas in the US, so that's really, really wonderful. If we did not get round to your question, we'll make sure to follow up individually with you. So do not worry. I have a ton of questions still that are unanswered. So we'll make sure to follow up with you individually. So thank you again for participating in the webinar, for being part of this important moment for us and for Galapagos. Please don't hesitate to stay connected with us, signing up either to our newsletter, although many of you I think already are. Please follow our podcast. Thank you, Bill, for reminding me to put that in there. We will definitely be putting content about the atlas in there. There's content both in English and in Spanish. We talk to their scientists on there, but we also talk to many people that are part of the conservation community or just the community in general that are not CDF particularly. So some really great content on there. But overall, thank you so much for joining. And to conclude, I would just like to wish you all a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good
Thank you.
day.
Thank you.
Thanks to all. It was wonderful.